Hi, this is Jane Joe, broker and owner of Perisson Real Estate, and thank you for watching this edition of Perisson Real Estate Pulse. It's been a little while since my last video. The summer got away from me a bit with family and traveling, but I hope that you've all had a great summer, and I do hope to be able to post videos more regularly moving forward. So for this video, I'm going to be starting out with a quick update, market update, since it's been a little while, and now we're more than halfway through the year. And then I would actually like to spend the bulk of my time talking about some of the changes that we've been seeing in the real estate industry and that you maybe have been hearing about in the news. So to start with my real estate market update, first of all, this is the indicator that many of you have seen if you watch my videos or come to seminars before. This is the median sale price for single family homes in San Mateo County, with that median price being the price at which the number of homes that sell above that price are the same as the number of homes below that price. So as you can see here, this goes back 10 years. We did see, if you look at that 2021 to 2022, there are some real blips that we had that was post-COVID as things just started taking off. And then we had a little bit of a kind of a plateauing and some drop with the interest rates once they started inching up toward the end of 2022 and into 2023. But overall, as you can see here on a 10-year level, it's almost as if you can draw a straight line just going from 2014 all the way up through 2024. To give you some numbers, April 2022 was hit an all-time high, and that was at 2.25 billion. And then, of course, as I mentioned, 2022, the middle of that, we started getting a drop off and some plateauing because of the interest rates all of a sudden increasing. But as people started getting used to the interest rates and they started easing back down a little bit, we did see this year in May hit another all-time high at 2.3 million. Since then, for June and July, it did drop off a little bit. And so with July, we ended up with a little over 2 million as the median sale price. In terms of months of inventory, as you can see here, so months of inventory has to do when you take the number of homes that are on the market and then divide that by the rate at which they're selling. You would come up with a number of months by which, if we didn't add anything new, we would just sell out of what we have. Traditionally, under 6 months is considered a seller's market. And as you can see here, the chart is actually capped off at 3 months. So as you can see here, going back for the last 10 years, we've been under the 3-month mark, pretty much bouncing around the 1.5 to 2.5 month territory. That time period where we saw that spike post-COVID, it actually did come down to 1 month to 1.5 months levels. And then since then it has increased. So you will hear in the news, oh, inventory is on the rise, but we're still here in San Mateo County, at least, pretty much hovering below the 2-month mark. And up above and below the 2-month mark. So still very low inventories, which is part of the reason why or one of the biggest reasons why our sale prices continue to stay very strong, relatively strong. Because if you think, 10 years ago, median sale price was around 1 million, and it's doubled since then and pretty much held right around that mark. And that's really mind-boggling if you think about it. To give you a different look of inventory, we can see here this is information provided by a company called Aculist, which is part of our MLS listing service. And here for San Mateo County, and this is all classes of homes, you can see that the number of weekly active, so this is tracks on a weekly level. So if you look at the bottom chart, the weekly new listings, that actually tracks with the previous 2 years. So the bright blue line is this year to date. And then we see the gray, the dark and the light grays are 2022 and 2023. The number of new listings is tracking fairly around the same rate. The thing that we are seeing is that with depending on how quickly homes sell or not and how long they stay on the market, with the weekly active listings, we're seeing a little bit of a different story. Where the number of active listings, homes that are still on the market at any present time, is higher than what we're experiencing last year. So the inventory levels, yes, they are a little bit higher, but if you look at the 2022 levels, they're still lower. And as a whole, as I mentioned, over the 10-year, if you look at it just 10 or 12-year period, we are still significantly lower than we should be to have a balanced market. So taking this to on a national level, this is provided by NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and this is what they were showing as of December 2023. So if you look at 2022 and 2021, 5.6 million homes. So this is now talking about more the volume of sales. So there were 5.6 million homes sold in 2020, 6.1. So it did go up in 2021. And then that dropped to 5.1 million in 2022. And then a significant drop even there to less than 4 million. So 3.9 million homes in all of 2023. And that represents a 23.5% drop. That is significant. And, I'm part of different networking groups, and even the agents that are top producers and doing very well, a lot of us did feel that the sales volume drop even in our area. And this is something that is experienced, again, nationwide. For 2024, the expectation is that there was an increase this year, that we will end up this year with 18% increase to end up about 4.6 million. And then the projection was in 2023, December 2023, the projection was that would increase further in 2025 and get us back up to closer to the levels pre-pandemic. A lot of what impacts that is interest rates, which we'll go into next. So here is a chart of, this is from Freddie Mac. And if you go on their website, they actually will show you all sorts of different parameters you can put in there. I always like to show, going back to, 1971 levels. This one I took to just take it on, again, a 10-year basis. And as you can see, over the course of the 10 years, the beginning of that, we were hovering around 4%, 4% interest rates for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. As we got into 2020, that decreased where people were seeing 3% and lower in terms of a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And so there was a lot of activity then, and then it just spiked up in the latter half of 2022 to where we're looking at, rates almost doubling within a matter of 1 or 2 months. That really made a lot of impact on the demand, because buyers started to get a little more skittish about buying a home, because their buying power was lost, and they're looking at rates in more like the 6% range, which is still not a bad rate on a historical level, but it was getting more prohibitive for people. And then, as we've seen in 2023, actually inched up to where in October we were very close to 8%. And then since then, that has come down. And as of last week, or as of August 15th, it was showing at about 6.5, so 6.49% as an average 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So as we see this, one of the impacts of interest rates is, yes, it's on the buyers, because the buyers were, and that'll hit the demand aspect of the economy, of always the market, right? So the buyers are, less buyers are a little bit more discouraged to buy, their buying power is down. But the other factor of interest rates is that it also impacted our inventory, because we would have sellers who have these 3%, 2% interest rates. I've actually heard of some who have mortgage rates less than 2 during those years, and during the 2020 years where people refinanced and took advantage of those rates. So if a seller is looking to now relocate and they have to sell their property and buy a new one, now they're looking at a mortgage that's 2 or 3 times higher. And so that was causing a rate lock-in effect as well in terms of our inventory or the supply, right? So seeing a depressed supply, seeing a depressed demand, that accounts for why we were seeing that low number of sales. Looking forward, though, so there are the projections. This is from Fannie Mae, the Mortgage Bankers Associations, and NAR. You can see these are the projections in terms of what we're expecting for Q3, so of third quarter of this year, to be able to be somewhere closer to the 6.8 range, which we have actually come down a little lower than that, and then possibly by Q4 to go again lower. And that tracks a little bit with, that tracks as well with what we're hearing from the Fed. People are expecting that maybe at their September meeting next month, or they have, and then they have 2 more meetings after that, that there will be at least some amount of a cut, maybe a 25 basis point cut, if not more. So people are expecting maybe 1 cut, maybe 2 by the end of this year. And again, the hope is that there might be a little bit of movement in terms of having the buyers and sellers being able to come out and be more excited about making a move. Just a caveat that when we say the Fed, when we talk about the Fed and what their interest, what they're lowering, that's the Fed funds rate. That is not necessarily directly related to the mortgage rate that we see here. And in some cases, I'm hearing that, you know, the bond market and all of that is already factoring in the projections of the decreases. So not sure if we're going to end up the year much lower than the 6.5%. Some people that I'm hearing from are thinking that maybe we will go lower. Some are saying maybe stay around that. And I'm even hearing from some economists the possibility that the mortgage rate may inch up a little bit because again, the bond market and you know, that impacts the mortgage rates is already factoring in the expectations from the Fed. So with that, I wanted to go into the changes that are happening in our industry as real estate agents. The predominant one has to do with commissions that people are hearing about. There is a second piece of the settlement that happened, and I do have videos on the YouTube channel that talk about the settlement in more detail, but this one is going to really focus on the changes as the deadline that NAR had and a lot of our associations are adhering to was August 17th. And so now we are almost a week, not quite a week into those changes. And more people are hearing about it in the news. So I wanted to cover that in more detail here. So first of all, I'm going to go into a bit of historically what has happened in terms of the offers of compensation. And I'll get a little more into what that means. So traditionally, a seller is going to sell their house. And what they do is come up with a listing agreement between them and their broker. And within that listing agreement, they decide how much am I going to pay my broker, my listing broker. From there, within that agreement as well, what is included, what was included is that there would be a compensation offered to a cooperating broker or the buyer's broker. So that would be offered to them out of what is being paid to the listing broker. So for example, you could say, okay, the seller is talking to a listing broker and says, all right, so if you sell my house, I am going to pay you 10 bottles of wine. And then from there, the listing broker and the seller agree, okay, from those 10 bottles of wine, the listing agent I'm going to share half of that. So I'm going to share 5 bottles of wine with the buyer, the person who brings in the buyer with a good offer, right? So that is the offer of compensation that we're offering. So the seller says, I'm going to listing broker 10 bottles of wine. Half of that, the 5 bottles of wine, will be offered to the buyer broker, and that would actually be listed on the MLS or the multiple listing service that you can see here. So, and that's noted as a compensation offer. If it's listed on the MLS, then there was an agreement that what is in MLS is binding. So then the buyer broker can now go into that go into that situation knowing that if they bring a good buyer, if they bring a buyer who has a successful offer, they are guaranteed that 5 bottles of wine. Between the buyer and the broker, there could be a buyer agreement. Some agents use that, some did not. And so there could be an agreement between the buyer and their agent as well. And what would happen there is that they could also agree the buyer could say that they would pay their agent. And then what would happen is that they go, okay, I'm going to pay you 5 bottles of wine. And then they look at the MLS and go, hey, this is going to, they're offering 5 bottles of wine. So that takes care of it. Or they can say, actually, I'm going to offer you only 3 bottles of wine. So on the MLS, it says 5. What happens with that extra 2 bottles? We'll agree to, either it goes back to the buyer or the buyer's agent, the buyer's broker can keep that. So there could be an agreement there, and that was not required. So not every single buyer, agent, or broker would have an agreement with their buyer to that effect. But because that compensation offer was in the MLS, the buyer broker effectively knew this is how much they're going to be paid. So in the event that the buyer had an agreement with their broker and said, okay, I'm going to pay you 5 bottles of wine, was actually included in that agreement that the buyer can instruct the buyer's broker, okay, I'm obligated to pay you 5. I only want you to let me know which properties have an offer of 5. bottles of wine so that you will be paid that what I owe you will be taken care of. So I only want to see the properties, or I won't only want to put in an offer on those properties where I know that I will not owe you anything extra. So there was that allowance that was in that agreement. So just putting that out there. And again, not everybody had a buyer's agreement with, not everybody signed an agreement with their agent. So post settlement, and this is what is happening now. What will happen is a seller again says they're going to sell, and they come to an agreement with the listing broker. And in that agreement, our forms have now been revised to say, this is how much I am going to pay you as listing broker. And it does not include anything in there in terms of what I am going to be paying, what the listing broker will be sharing, or what I'll be paying a buyer's agent. It strictly says in there, all that it says in there is, this is how much we're going to be agreeing to pay for. So in the past, if I would agree to 10 bottles of wine and share 5, now I'm just going to agree to my portion, which is the 5 bottles of wine. From there, there can be in the listing agent marketing plan, they can include, if the seller so stipulates and says they want to actually offer something to pay for a buyer's broker, that could be agreed upon, and then they would, that can be advertised, but it cannot be included on the MLS or any portals related to the MLS. And it's not really binding. So even if you put it on the website and say, hey, I'm offering you 5 bottles of wine to a buyer's agent, it's not binding. So it would actually have to be included in the agreement anyway. Okay, but it is something that could be advertised. And on the other hand, the buyer and their broker do have to now have a buyer's agreement. At this time, it is only limited to those agents who are a part of the National Association of Realtors. And if you're participating in an MLS that is part of, that is associated with an association or part of the agreement, you also do have to have that agreement signed. Come January 1st, there is some legislation in the works to make it mandatory for any agent, whether you're part of NAR or not, to have that agreement with a buyer's agent, with a buyer, but it is currently not, that is not necessarily required if you're not a part of NAR, and if you're not going to be a part of MLS and have to follow their rules. So in any case, so the buyer would have an agreement with their agent. There is nothing in the new buyer agreement that says that they're not going to show it if they don't know that they're going to get paid. If the seller does not say anything, or the listing agent does not have anything in their marketing to say that they're offering anything to the buyer's broker, there's nothing in there that says that a buyer's instructing their broker to show or not show, to offer or not offer. So again, just in a nutshell, seller has an agreement with their broker, buyer has an agreement with their broker. It may or may not be known by communications, emails, referrals, etc., but it can not be shown, even if the seller is willing to pay something, it cannot be shown in an MLS. So what does this mean for sellers? Well, so first of all, sellers may instruct the listing agent that they are willing to consider concessions. This is a wording, and I know that there are some company forms out there. It is not included in our standard California forms, but I know that there are a lot of companies out there that do have addendums that say, if a seller is willing to consider something, then they can mark it there. And then that can be my second point, which is in MLS, you are allowed to say that the seller is willing to consider a concession. This cannot be directly related to buyer agent compensation, but it may be noted that they are willing to consider that concession, and it is not binding unless it's negotiated into the purchase agreement. So even if a seller says, sure, I'm willing to consider a concession, I'm willing to give you whatever, extra $50,000, right? That you cannot take that from the MLS and say, see, you said that. You have to actually put it into the purchase agreement and evaluate, and then negotiate it from there. The buyer broker compensation, as I mentioned, it may still be offered by the seller, but that would have to be outside of the MLS. And in our forms, in the listing agreement, there is no actually wording for that. So that would be something that would have to be agreed upon separately. Definitely should be done in writing. And then from there, the listing agent, if agreed to with the seller, then the listing agent can publicize that in emails. They can talk, if somebody calls them, they can make that communication. They can put it at open houses. So that is all allowed, but it cannot, again, be directly put into MLS, or if there's a separate link, it can't be like it's not necessarily a one touch, but one click kind of thing. But it definitely, if it's directly, like if you have disclosures in some kind of a website, you cannot put that. And if you put something in the disclosures that directly talks about buyer broker compensation, you cannot have a link to that disclosure package in the MLS. So the MLS, and I'm part of the MLS board, we're being very, very careful about this. We are going to have it. So if it does come up that somebody is in violation, the first time, it'll be a slap on the wrist and a warning and just education, because these are confusing rules there is some confusion out there, but after that we're going to be very strict about it, because we want to make sure that we are in compliance with the settlement. And finally, though, all concessions for compensation need to be negotiated within the offer or the residential purchase agreement. And I think this is really important in that whether you say you are willing or not willing, right? Ultimately, it's nothing is binding. It has to be done in the purchase agreement. And I would just encourage sellers to, be willing to consider, consider all offers that are reasonable, and to consider the best offer. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. So what this means for buyers. Well, as I mentioned, before showing any property, agents are required to sign an agreement with buyers that they will be their agent, that they will be their agent for a specific term, and that can be no more than 3 months, and you can extend that out if it goes past that, and that there will be a specific compensation. So that is required before even seeing any property together. When it comes to seeing homes and writing offers, buyers may or may not know how much compensation or concessions the seller is willing to pay. So, I know some people are a little bit freaking out, and the buyer's agents are going, well, what do I do if I don't know what they're going to pay? I would just encourage, especially in a low inventory market, see everything that fits. And if it works for you, write an offer and do whatever you can to package that offer well, to be professional, and to negotiate it in. That's part of the reason why you have an agent, right? Is to help you negotiate and make sure that we get to a point where we can get an offer that works well for, that is accepted and that works well for you. And finally, really, the buyers need to now be ready with a plan to take care of any agreed upon compensation if the seller's not willing to do that within the offer. And this is where it's going to be a little bit more tricky, because, and this is where I think, in the past, what's effectively happened is a buyer and a seller agree to a price. The buyer is paying that price, and they're financing, all of that's happening, right? And so, they have their down payment, they're getting a loan, etc. And so whatever extra is being paid to their agent is coming from the seller indirectly from the buyer, right? And so it's kind of in effect being financed. And now that is not happening as much. So, and a bank is not willing to finance compensation to a buyer's agent at this time. And so there needs to be some kind of a plan. And I think that's what will be a little bit more tricky, especially for buyers who may be very close in terms of, what reserves they have and what, how much they can afford in terms of their down payment. A quick aside, note on open houses, because I know there's some confusion out there. Although I said that if you are an agent, if showing a property to a buyer, that they need to have an agreement before we go and see properties together. With open houses, there is actually not a requirement to sign an agreement between the buyer and the agent who's holding the open house, just for the buyer to be able to see it. And the thought is that if I'm opening an open house, I'm doing that on behalf of my seller, right? That's the whole part of marketing. I'm putting up a sign, I'm printing out flyers, I'm, taking professional pictures, putting on the internet. Well, holding an open house, whether I'm doing it as an agent or I have an agent who is helping me with that, either way, we are working on behalf of the seller to provide access to prospective buyers. So if you think of it that way, then, we're an agent and the seller. Whatever information that we're providing as agents of the seller, right? And that's why we, that confidentiality that we owe to the seller, all of that needs to be kept at an open house. In some cases, if you walk into an open house, you may see an open house advisory form that is provided, and it talks about the fact that, again, the agents are working on behalf of the seller. There are little forms at the bottom, not a signature, but where you can sign in and add in your information. You can do that, but it is not required to see the house. So if you do have an agent who says, "Oh, you have to sign this form to see this house at an open house," you can push back against that and talk to your buyer agent, assuming you have one, and make sure that they are clear with that agent. Hey, this is not required. And in fact, that advisory, if you read it right there, it says, "I am not your agent," right? And you are not going to be required to sign that buyer broker form that is out there promising that they're going to be your agent, that you're going to owe them something. That is not required for an open house. Well, so what does this mean for agents? Because I do have, maybe some sellers and buyers are like, I don't really care what happens to the agents, but I know a lot of my clients and community, when they talk to me, they go, "So were you doing okay? And how's this going to impact you?" And I really appreciate that. And I figure some people might be curious. Well, first of all agents need to be able to understand and explain the process to their clients. And unfortunately, there are some agents who are a little overwhelmed right now, or maybe don't have a lot of transactions going on and aren't really aware of the changes that are happening. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us, if you're going to be representing clients in one of the biggest investments of their lives, that we should understand what's going on and be able to explain the process, explain the forms, although we're not attorneys, but at least explain it, have a good, competent knowledge of what's going on to be able to explain the repercussions. For listing agents, we need to be able to help sellers evaluate the pros and cons of offering concessions and or compensation, as well as compare all offers in their entirety for the best outcome. So first of all, do we even go to that process? As I mentioned, our standard listing agreement does not even include anything directly about concessions or compensation. There are agents that are, and I'm plugged into a lot of different groups, so there are agents who are talking about continuing with things kind of the way they are. They're going to have addendums and extra forms to offer concessions, etc. And I think there are definite pros and cons to that. Personally, just to let you know, I am actually not planning to ask sellers to do that, because I think, we have an offer price, welcome all offers as they come in, and see and then evaluate those based on what is the best outcome for you as a seller. So I think just offering upfront, especially because our inventory right now, at least, is relatively low, is a buyer's agent not going to come just because they don't know what we're offering or not offering? I would argue, first of all, they're not allowed. That was part of the problem in the first place. We're not allowed to screen and to say, and to steer clients to say, "Oh, that place is off. I know I'm going to get paid with that one, so let's go with that," right? So, and I think in a low inventory market, I know for sure for myself with my buyers, I'm going to show them everything that works for them, right? And then we're going to negotiate it out to make sure that I hopefully get fairly paid, right? And then welcome but again, going back to sellers, welcome all offers in their entirety. And it's not always just about the price. There's the price, there's concessions, there's contingencies and different terms. And there's even the professionalism of the agent on the other side. There's the buyer's qualifications, the amount of the loan. There's so many things that are involved in an offer that we just, as a listing agent, we need to help our sellers, as always, evaluate those offers, right? And having that extra line of concessions, compensation, that's not that difficult to do. So I think we'll be fine. Buyer's agents, I think there's going to be more of a challenge, definitely, of having a buyer sign an agreement just to see a property. Many times, those who are just starting out in real estate, the bulk of their business has more to do with buyers than sellers. And not every buyer out there has the extra money to afford the compensation, or not every buyer wants to even commit to you right away just to be able to have you open a door for them, right? Because the relationship has yet to be established. So there will be a little more challenge in terms of having buyers sign and being able to show your value, as well as making sure that they can afford it, and or being able to negotiate into the purchase agreement, right? If they're not going to pay it themselves, definitely the first avenue that you want to do is be able to negotiate well, have a great offer package that is, in place, clean, complete, so that that will help present, the best offer for your clients. You can be the best representative for your clients and also get paid, right? That you can get paid. So that's the impact on us as agents. And what does this mean for the real estate industry as a whole? Will it impact home prices? I'm getting mixed. I think it will make it a little more messy because in the past, you can see the home prices and there were, you could see what was being paid for what was being offered for the buyer agent. Now those concessions are not going to be visible. And so you may have homes that sell at different prices, but when you consider concessions, they might equal out. And so what the impact will be in terms of our data, we're still not clear. Will it send the home prices soaring down? I don't think so, but we'll see what will happen. Impact on sellers, as I mentioned, I think it'll probably be the least impact on the sellers in terms of, they're going to still be paying their agents, and then they just have to look at what are the best offers out there. Impact on buyers, especially those who can't afford that extra amount. I think that's where we're going to see more of the challenge. And already with VA and FHA loans, where people have a low down payment, the VA thankfully has made an allowance for now in terms of the buyer being able to pay a little bit more, being able to pay that buyer broker payment that they need to do, and or getting the concession. That there are a lot of different things that are happening there, but I think that's going to be one of the biggest impacts. And then impacts on the real estate industry as a whole. I am hearing of people who are talking about, of different stats where the expectations are that more real estate agents may be getting out of the business just because it's going to be a little bit more challenging. They have to justify their pay a little bit more. It's already been challenging with the low inventory levels and whatnot. And so what impact that will have on the newer agents coming in, many of whom tend to have a more buyer heavy business at the beginning, as well as on the agents who've been around for a long time. And I think in some cases, I'm actually seeing the agents who are more seasoned having a little more difficulty with this and kind of holding on to, well, we've always done it this way, and wanting to continue with status quo. And I don't think that we can continue like that. And so I think that's something that we're going to be looking at as well in terms of what is the impact on real estate, the industry as a whole, on real estate agents. I do have other YouTube videos in terms of why a seller would want to have a buyer's agent, why a buyer would want to have a buyer's agent. And I hope that if you haven't had a look at that, if you are thinking about buying or selling in the near future, that you take a look at those videos, because I do think that real estate agents are not going to go away. And there's a very real reason as to why not, right? And that we're very instrumental, during the pandemic, real estate agents were considered essential workers. And I think there's a very real reason for that. So I hope you'll take a look at that video if you haven't done so already. And I put this in one of my other videos, but it bears repeating. It's all about relationships. And I think that's what it's going to boil down to, whether it be the sellers with their agents and with the buyers with their agents, with the agents overall, and communicating with one another, being able to help each other negotiate. Perisson, my company, is the Greek word for, it's based on the Greek word for abundance. And I truly, truly believe that we do still live in so much abundance and so many blessings. And that as we help one another, as we work together, we can help each other to thrive. And we can get to a point where the sellers accomplish their goals of selling their homes, getting, a good net to be able to accomplish their goals moving forward, as well as the buyers being able to accomplish their dreams of buying their first home, buying investment property, buying a home that's going to be, become a family home for them, or become a place where they can have a good office to work in, or invite people over, accomplish those goals, as well as having all of us as real estate agents in the industry being able to be fairly compensated and be able to make a living in this area. So I think it's all about relationships. It's all about really recognizing that we do live in abundance and that we can help lift each other up. So with that, I'm going to end, but I did want to end with some announcements in terms of the seminars that I have continuing in our series on real estate and finance in the golden years. So these are the last ones for the year, and my hope is that you'll be able to join us for one or all of them. September 11th, we have estate planning basics via Zoom. And if you do not have a trust and you have property and you have loved ones, or you don't have anyone that you know where your property is going to go to, extremely, extremely important. So I really hope that you'll join us for that. Then we have the following week, advanced estate planning, which will be in person at the Millbrae Recreation Center. And we're going to be talking about all the different issues that could arise that are a little more complicated. A really common one is when you have blended families, which is very common, or if you have multiple properties and multiple heirs, and how best to navigate that so that they don't have any issues moving forward. And then November 6th, earlier this year, we had scheduled this seminar, Remodeling Options for Aging in Place. And unfortunately, our speaker at the last minute had a tornado touchdown near her house, so couldn't make it. So we have rescheduled that for November 6th. So I really hope that you will be able to join us for these as well, and that will be via Zoom. So that does it for this recording. I hope that was useful for you. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And I know it can be a little bit confusing, but that's what we're here for. And if you or anybody that you know is thinking about buying or selling in the near future, please reach out to me, and I would be happy to be a resource for you as always. Thank you very much.